Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the house feels too quiet, like it's holding its breath. I had just finished folding the last of the laundry and was considering whether to treat myself to a second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, half curious and half annoyed. My house, ever since my son moved out, had fallen into a soft, lonely rhythm. Visitors were rare these days, and surprises even more so. I pulled open the door, and for a moment, I was frozen. Standing there, with that easy, familiar smile and eyes that still sparkled with youthful charm, was Evan, my son's childhood best friend. "Hey, Mrs. Whitman," he said, that same boyish grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "I was driving through the area and thought I'd stop by. Hope it's not a bad time?" I hadn't seen him in over 10 years. The last time he sat at my kitchen table, he was a gangly teenager with messy hair and a backpack full of video games. Now he stood taller, broader, his once slender frame now filled out with age and confidence. And that voice, deeper, richer, still had that playful lilt I remembered so well. "Oh my goodness!" I gasped, pulling the door open wider. Come in. Look at you. You've changed so much." We hugged briefly, warm, polite, and he stepped inside, glancing around with a mix of nostalgia and curiosity. The house hadn't changed much. Same old furniture. Same photos on the wall. Except now, the silence wasn't interrupted by the clatter of boys' feet or the constant hum of video games. "I can't believe it's been so long," I said, motioning for him to sit. "How are you? How's your family? What brings you back here?" He smiled as he sat at the edge of the couch. "Work, mostly. I've got a business meeting in the city tomorrow. Thought I'd drive down memory lane a bit before the chaos starts." I made coffee, strong, with a hint of cinnamon, just like I used to when the boys were around. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where they used to do homework, or at least pretend to. He told me about his life in Seattle, his job in architecture, his travels. I listened, fascinated, feeling a strange mix of pride and something I couldn't quite place, an ache maybe, a longing. Somewhere between the second cup and a shared laugh about how he once broke my favorite lamp trying to juggle oranges, I realized I was staring. He was no longer that awkward boy with skinned knees and a crooked smile. He was a man now, composed, thoughtful, and strikingly handsome. It startled me. "Still remember that lamp?" He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I thought you were going to ban me from the house after that." "I should have," I teased, shaking my head. "But you always had a way of charming your way out of trouble." He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes held mine for a second too long, and I felt my cheeks flush. I broke the gaze, busying myself with tidying up the cups. "Are you staying in town tonight?" Actually, I hadn't figured that out yet. Was thinking of booking a hotel after dinner. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, almost too quickly. "You can stay here. The guest room's made up, and it's just me rattling around in this big old house anyway." He hesitated, but only for a moment. "If you're sure. I wouldn't want to impose." "You're not imposing. It'll be nice to have someone around." As I made dinner, he lingered in the kitchen, offering to help. We moved around each other with an ease that surprised me, the kind that only comes from history, from shared memories tucked into the corners of every room. We ate together at the dining table, a soft jazz playlist humming in the background. Conversation flowed effortlessly. We reminisced, laughed, and then slowly, without intending to, drifted into deeper waters, talking about the loss of people we loved, regrets we carried, the strange ache of growing older, and feeling like the best parts of life had quietly slipped past. "I never told you this," he said quietly, looking down at his plate, "but you were always kind of a role model for me." I looked at him, surprised. "You were warm, strong. You always made this house feel like a real home." Something in my chest tightened, and I wasn't sure if it was gratitude or guilt or a flutter of something I hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." The night stretched on. The clock crept past 11, and we were still talking, legs curled under us on the couch, wine glasses in hand, the space between us slowly shrinking. And then there was a pause. A soft, meaningful silence. He looked at me, eyes gentle. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, unsure what was coming next. "Did you ever feel like you missed out on something? Something just for you?" I blinked, caught off guard. "All the time," I whispered. "But life doesn't always ask us what we want, does it?" He nodded, his gaze still locked with mine. "Maybe sometimes. It does." The air grew thick with emotion, with something unspoken but undeniably real. A pull, a possibility. And in that moment, I realized something had shifted. A boundary crossed not with words or touch, but with a look. A shared truth. An invitation to feel something again. Something unexpected. Something deeply human. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing in ways they hadn't in years. The house was quiet, but the silence no longer felt familiar. It felt charged, like the air just before a summer storm. Even was in the guest room, just across the hallway. The same room where my mother used to stay. The same bed where my son's friends used to crash after long gaming nights. But this time, the presence in that room wasn't that of a boy. It was a man, and for reasons I hadn't fully sorted out yet, that mattered. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just an old friend visiting, just catching up. But deep down, I knew something had stirred tonight. A look, a question, a shared vulnerability that had opened a door neither of us expected. The next morning, I made breakfast out of habit, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. But I moved slower, more aware of everything. The creak in the floorboards, the way the light slanted through the curtains, the subtle hum of the refrigerator. Everything felt more vivid. He came down wearing a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, his hair tousled from sleep. There was something disarming about seeing him like that, comfortable, unguarded, familiar, yet new. "Morning," he said with a sleepy smile. "Something smells good." "Morning," I replied, turning back to the stove. "Hope you like eggs." "Only if they're made with cinnamon coffee on the side," he teased. I laughed softly. "Well, aren't you lucky?" We ate in companionable silence for a while, the clink of forks on plates the only sound between us. But the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that grows between people who feel safe with each other. After breakfast, we ended up sitting on the back porch. The garden was blooming early this year. Tulips and daffodils nodded gently in the spring breeze, and the trees were starting to wear their green again. He leaned back in the wicker chair, sipping his coffee, eyes scanning the yard. "You still take care of the garden?" "Every year," I nodded. "It's therapy, I guess." "It's beautiful, peaceful." We sat there for a long time, not saying much, just existing, and it felt good, Strange, but good, to have someone beside me, to share this little pocket of morning without having to fill it with noise. I almost got married a few years ago, he said suddenly. I turned to look at him. Really? Yeah. Her name was Marissa. We were together for 3 years. It ended quietly. No big fights. Just a realization that we wanted different things. There was a pause. I waited. I think, deep down, I knew I wasn't showing up the way I should have. Something was missing. Not from her, but from me. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Sometimes we don't realize what we're missing until someone reflects it back at us. He looked at me then, really looked, and I felt it again, that pull. Not just attraction, but connection, depth, recognition. You've changed, he said quietly. How so? You seem softer, calmer, but stronger too, like you've made peace with something. I thought about that. Maybe I have. Or maybe I've just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. The breeze picked up slightly, brushing a strand of hair across my face. He reached out instinctively, tucking it behind my ear. His fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary. My heart stuttered. I should go for a walk, I said, standing a bit too quickly. Get some air. He stood too. Mind if I join you? We walked side by side down the quiet neighborhood streets, the kind where every porch had a wind chime and every yard had a story. As we walked, we talked about everything and nothing. Favorite books, old memories, music we'd both forgotten we loved. The conversation danced between light and heavy like a well-worn waltz. Eventually, we made our way to the lake at the edge of town. It was calm, the surface like glass, reflecting the pale blue sky above. We stood at the edge for a moment, both of us quiet. I used to come here with your son, he said. We'd skip rocks and talk about what life would be like when we got older. And now you're here, I said softly, older. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. And you're here too, still, you. I laughed, but it came out breathier than I intended. What does that mean? It means, I don't know. Maybe it means I never really saw you until now. That hit me. A flutter, low and warm. You were always the cool mom, he continued. But now, you're more than that. You're real, whole. And maybe I'm finally grown enough to appreciate that. I didn't know what to say. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of spring and lake water. I looked out over the lake, letting the moment settle. When I turned back, he was still watching me. I began, but he gently interrupted. I'm not trying to make this complicated. I just needed you to know how I see you now. And I don't expect anything. I just felt it. His honesty disarmed me. There was no pressure, no expectation, just openness. And something in me cracked open too, quietly, like the first bud of a flower that doesn't even realize it's blooming. I see you too, I whispered. We walked back slowly, shoulders brushing now and then. Something had shifted again, and this time neither of us tried to ignore it. That night, we sat by the fireplace, the soft glow painting our faces in gold. We didn't say much, but our silence was full of things felt, things acknowledged. And when it was time to sleep, we stood in the hallway, lingering in that narrow space between two doors. Good night, he said softly. Good night, Ivan. He reached out, touching my hand gently. Just a touch. Barely there. but it lingered long after he disappeared into the guest room. And I stood there, alone in the hallway, heart full of questions I wasn't afraid to ask any more. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The following morning, the house felt heavier. Or maybe it was me. Maybe it was the weight of awareness, of knowing that something had quietly shifted between us. I moved through the kitchen slower than usual, conscious of the echo of last night's quiet. The space between Evan's door and mine had never felt so short, and so wide. I told myself not to read too much into it, but I did. He came down dressed for the day, jeans and a button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked casual, but sharp, like someone who knew who he was now. "Sleep okay?" I asked, glancing up from the frying pan. He smiled, better than I expected. We shared breakfast again, like it was routine, like we'd done it for years. The conversation danced lightly over things like his meeting that afternoon, the weather, the garden. But under it all, I could feel something else humming, a new current neither of us wanted to name too soon. As he packed up his things after breakfast, preparing to leave for his meeting in the city, I felt a strange ache in my chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something, and I wasn't ready for it to be over. "You'll be back tonight?" I asked, hoping it sounded casual. He paused, glancing at me. "If the invitation still stands." "It does." "Then I'd love to." And just like that, the day stretched out before me with the promise of something more. I spent the afternoon cleaning, not because the house needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I changed the guest sheets, fluffed the pillows, not that he'd notice, and then wandered outside to the garden. I dug my fingers into the soil, planting a few fresh herbs. The earth was warm, moist, grounding. But even there, in the quiet hush of rustling leaves and birdsong, I could still feel him, like his presence had settled into the house itself. When the sun began to dip and the shadows grew longer, I went inside, washed the dirt from my hands, and changed into something a little softer, a little more me. I told myself it wasn't a date. I told myself I was just being polite, but deep down, I knew better. When he arrived, he brought a bottle of wine, dry red, and a small bouquet of wildflowers he must have picked up on the way. "For the hostess," he said, grinning. I took them, heartwarming. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Dinner was simple. Roasted chicken, asparagus, and rice, but it felt special somehow. We talked more than we ate, our conversation slipping into deeper waters again without effort. And then the wine ran low, and the night grew quiet. He helped me wash the dishes, sleeves rolled up, hands wet and laughing when he accidentally splashed water on my shirt. I tossed a towel at him. He caught it, his fingers brushing mine. The laughter faded slowly, replaced by a gentle hush. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice low. I nodded. "Do you ever think about starting over? Not going back, but opening a new chapter?" I swallowed. The question hit me somewhere tender. Sometimes, but starting over feels scary, like I missed the window. "I don't think the window ever really closes," he said, meeting my gaze. "We just forget it's still there." We stood there, eyes locked in the dim kitchen light, the rest of the world fading out. And I knew in that moment this was more than just nostalgia, more than loneliness. This was two people meeting again in a new way. He stepped closer. I didn't move away. His hand lifted, tentative at first, then steady, brushing gently against my cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The same simple gesture as before, but this time it lingered. "I never meant for this to happen," he said softly. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle over me like warm rain. I've been trying not to feel it, but I do. There was a silence that said everything. He didn't kiss me. Not yet. Instead, he stepped back slightly, giving space, not out of doubt, but respect. "I don't want to rush this," he said, "and I don't want you to ever wonder if it was just a moment." I nodded. Me neither. We moved to the living room, the fire once again crackling gently. We sat side by side, close enough to feel the heat of each other's presence, but far enough to keep the line between us clear. And that line, thin and delicate, pulsed between us like a heartbeat. He reached out, resting his hand gently on mine. Not a move, not a claim, just a connection. We stayed like that for a long time, quiet, still, as the firelight danced across the walls. Eventually, he stood. "I should turn in," he said, voice almost a whisper. "Okay," I replied, my throat suddenly dry. He looked at me one last time, a look filled with all the unspoken things between us, and disappeared down the hall. I sat there for a while, hand still tingling from his touch, heart full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not infatuation, not fantasy, but hope. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a risk to let it in. I woke up early the next morning, before the sun had even begun to peek through the curtains. The house was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not lonely, just peaceful, settled. I sat at the edge of my bed for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The events of the last 2 days lingered around me like the scent of old perfume, faint, familiar, but undeniably present. I could still feel his hand on mine, the weight of his gaze when he looked at me like I wasn't just someone from his past, but someone who mattered now. I went downstairs barefoot, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet, and started the coffee. I didn't expect him to be up yet, but to my surprise, Even was already sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through something on his phone, wearing that same soft gray t-shirt and a quiet smile. "Morning," I said gently. He looked up and his smile deepened. "Morning." There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a calm kind of closeness that made me feel like we were already somewhere new, even if we hadn't fully said it out loud yet. I handed him a cup of coffee and sat across from him. We sipped in silence for a while, letting the warmth settle into our bones. "You know," he said finally, "I thought a lot about last night." "So did I admitted. He set his cup down and leaned forward slightly, his eyes sincere. "I meant what I said. I'm not here for something temporary. I didn't come back hoping for this. But now that it's here, I don't want to walk away from it. The part of me that had grown used to being alone, that had convinced itself I was past the age of possibilities, wanted to resist. But the other part, the quieter, wiser part, simply nodded. "I don't know what this is yet," I said, "and I'm not ready to put a name on it, but I do know that it feels real and rare, and I don't want to run from that." His hand found mine again, this time with quiet certainty. There was no rush, no urgency,